Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is a Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. So we're back for episode 2. I guess 1 was a moderate success, as those things can be measured when you don't actually know. And here we are.
Well, yeah, moderate success might be overstating it a bit. Like the 8 people that we cherry picked to listen to it seemed to enjoy it.
My mom thought it was great.
There you go. My wife listened to the first 10 minutes while doing other things, and I finally just turned it off because she clearly wasn't paying attention. She swears to this day that, no, I was listening to him. Like, yeah, okay, sweetie. You totally weren't, but that's fine.
Dude, like I told you, my wife came and woke me up from a nap. She was like, dude, I want to talk about your podcast. I'm like, okay.
Well,
that was cool.
Hopefully this one will be even better received because, one, I'm not super hoarse like the last time, and I don't sound like I'm in another room trying to shout through a doorway to get on the microphone.
Added texture and interest. You should tell Nicole we talked about her in it. Then maybe she'll listen to the whole thing.
That actually would be counterproductive for, I think, my good married life.
So I wanted to close the loop on a couple of things that happened last time. One, we told the story of Patrick Bull, who was a guy I played against in the limited Grand Prix in the Magic the Gathering tournament we were in. And I wanted to just tell what happened afterwards, because after you and I... So it immediately after we'd had that incident with the judge where he had... We'd potentially disrupted a match, and I'd made a rules violation, all that kind of stuff, and he handled it very gracefully and well. Then we came back and recorded the podcast. Well, after that, we went back to the venue, and I was following him around. You know, I was able to look him up in the pairings, and then go to where he was and see him playing, and he would make eye contact with me and kind of give me a smile, and he still looked nervous, but he did well enough the rest of that day. We met up in the 4th round, and there was 9 rounds the first day, and he did well enough the rest of that day that he qualified for day 2, which is kind of a big deal. He didn't ultimately make top 8 or win the tournament, but I just wanted to point out that the rest of the story was that after I conceded the victory to him in the 4th round, he went on to make day 2.
And this is something that you would totally do, is just take a random event like that and then follow the guy the rest of the tournament just to catch up and see how he was doing. Me, I thought it was just a funny anecdote and just let it go. I'm like, oh, that was an interesting thing that happened. But no, you go to the next...
I wanted him to do well.
You went to the next level and you followed his rankings. And then I didn't hear about... I knew you kept telling me for the rest of the tournament that, oh, Patrick made it to day 2. And, oh, look, he won his next round, because you were constantly checking and updating. I didn't realize that you had gone around to actually go see him and then look at him and wave at him. That's a different level to me, because then, like you said, he caught my eye a couple times and waved, and I feel like if that was me, I'd have seen you and waved like, oh great, this guy's stalking me. Like, is he into me? Like, what's going on?
Unfortunately, there's no way for me to control how he felt about the situation, but as far as I could tell, he seemed like, oh, I've got a friend now. So I stopped seeing him after that.
I bet you that's what he thought. It's like, oh, we're gonna be BFFs.
I tried to look him up on social media, couldn't find him. So that's the end. That's the end.
That's because after the second time he saw you stalking him at the tournament, he went back and blocked you on all of his social media. What was that guy's name? Block.
I don't know if he was just trying to be polite, but if you recall, after I conceded to him, you and I mentioned, he's like, so what are you guys going to do now? And we said, oh, we're going to go back to our hotel room and record a podcast. And he goes, really? I'd like to listen to that. So I was going to give him the chance, since we actually did it.
Well, and this is another indication of how you and I view the world differently, because I immediately assume that he wants nothing to do with us forever for the rest of your life, and then you immediately assume that, oh, we could totally be friends and hang out and see each other at future tournaments. So that's just how we approach these social interactions differently, I guess.
So there's one other thing I want to close the loop on. So after that, the day 2, you and I caught an Uber to the airport together, and we went out. Go ahead.
I had the show notes pulled up yesterday when we were going to record, which is something we should talk about. But and then I just this morning realized that Uber lady made it to the list, and yeah, sure, we can talk about the Uber lady.
Okay, the only reason I put it in the show notes is because I wanted to ask you about what happened, and I didn't get a chance to then because we were in the car with her, and then after we got out, we got distracted and we were talking about something else. So, I know that you have kind of had a past history as an atheist of potentially being a bit for lack of a better word, persecuted for your position that you've chosen to take. And we got in that car with that lady, and she had on like full-on happy clappy gospel music.
I don't know if it was happy clappy gospel music.
It was popular gospel music. So one of the songs was like a rap song.
Yeah, I never heard like R&B, like a hardcore top 40 gospel music before.
Yeah. So she acted like she was asking us if she wanted us to change the radio station, but she wasn't asking us. She was like, I hope you're okay with my gospel music. I don't know. Do you remember what she said?
She had said something to the effect of, I couldn't get to church this morning, so this is my church today.
Got it.
And that was just like, as soon as she said that, I don't know if you noticed, I'm like, oh, well, that's great. And while I was saying that, I had my phone out looking up the Google Maps. Okay, how long is this ride going to last?
Okay, so that's what I kind of thought you were doing, but I also don't know if you realize this, but we stumbled into an area where I thought I potentially was more uncomfortable with the situation than you.
Oh, really? I wasn't.
Yeah,
I wasn't really uncomfortable. Let's clarify. Like, people are free to do and believe whatever they want. I'm not one of these militants that are out there saying, "Oh, well, what you believe is wrong, and here's 1,000 reasons why." Listen, you just do whatever you want. I'll do whatever I want, and as long as we don't interfere with each other, that's fine. It wasn't so uncomfortable so much as just like an annoying situation. Just kind of like, take the internal. All right, well, I'm just gonna put up with this for the next few minutes. Just like crying baby on an airplane.
So maybe you just have more practice at that than I do. Like, you're better at it than me. But for me, you're familiar with the term the Uncanny Valley, right?
I am, yes.
Okay, it's a sci-fi term that means when something approaches reality, it becomes even more uncomfortable than if it's far away. Like a mannequin of a human being that's incredibly lifelike, but it's almost there, and then it really is creepy because it's not quite.
Yeah,
that's kind of how I feel.
I've always heard that in the frame of reference of like video game graphics. Like, if the graphics get like really, really, like, the better the graphics get, the more perfect they have to be, because your mind keys into the tiny differences, and then what would be like a minor thing in a different game, because it's so close to reality here and now. Like, your brain really keys in on it and just makes it even worse than it would have been.
Precisely. So I have an Uncanny Valley problem with gospel music. Because I'm a lifelong Christian,
mm-hmm.
and I cannot listen to gospel music because I don't like music that's supposed to sound like pop music but has like the lyrics of something sacred or holy. It's the Uncanny Valley for me. I can't go there. So gospel music makes me kind of uncomfortable. If I stumble on a gospel station, I'm like digging a song, and then I realize it's gospel music, and I change the station. I just don't like it.
That's interesting, because I've always had the same kind of reaction to gospel music, where it's almost, I don't want to say exploiting in a way, because people are always going to people that feel strongly about their faith are going to find ways to channel and express that. And, if you're a musician, obviously that's going to show in your music. And so you want to share that, your feelings and your beliefs and everything, with the world. And like, I just can only hope that the monetization of it comes secondary to spreading the message. But my inkling is that it's not. My inkling is that a lot of these musicians, the primary focus is to make money, and then the gospel genre is just maybe slow-hanging fruit, or an easier. I don't know anything about music. I don't have the vocabulary. It's just.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's just, it feels like lazy. Like, it's not great pop and it's not great gospel, but it was easy, opportunistic way to get some money.
Yeah, it's a genre where people are going to be like, oh, well, I don't really like this artist because he's not very good. Because like, it feels like if you're trying to criticize the skills of a gospel artist, it almost kind of morphs into you're criticizing the message, and you're not allowed to do that.
So there was this filmmaker in my church that got really popular a few years ago. His name was, I think, Robert Dutcher or Fincher. Dang, I'll have to look it up here in a second. But he started making films and was starting to get a lot of attention because he was making films that were kind of about life as a member of my church, that were starting to kind of get over this hokey, clean vibe that all films have, where it's just not very realistic. And he actually started to produce some films like about being a missionary and about, having a crisis of faith and those kind of things that really felt like they were striking true to home. And he gave this talk where he talked about how that there was kind of problems where people will hide behind the label family friendly to mean that they don't have to bother to make a good film.
That makes sense. I mean, I can see that.
How he felt like he was on a crusade as a filmmaker to put the onus on the filmmakers to actually make good films instead of just making poor quality films and passing them off as good films by calling them family friendly, so that they can kind of use that as a pass for not actually making them good films.
That's funny. Well, you know what this brings to mind is so I get a lot of eclectic knowledge from watching stupid TV shows, because they make jokes that you bring up items or topics that you would never think about. Did you ever watch 30 Rock when it was on TV?
I didn't. I'm aware of it.
Man, like, you don't watch anything, but you're aware of a lot of it.
Okay. I didn't watch 30 Rock, but I got to tell you something. I recently read Tina Fey's book, Bossy Pants, that she wrote and published right at the time when 30 Rock was at the peak of its popularity. Okay. So even though I've never watched a single episode of 30 Rock, I probably know more than your average didn't ever watch an episode.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, if we were going to talk about the behind the scenes things, then it would make sense that you would probably know more. But we're not. I'm going to talk about a scene that's in the show, and one of them was one of the characters was trying to make a movie. It started out as like this horror movie, but then like the corporate guy, Alec Baldwin's character, got involved. He's like, if we film it in this state, then we get tax breaks. Oh, and if we get we have this product on screen, then we can get these incentives or this product placement or this money from these sponsors. And like throughout the show, they showed the same scene of this horror movie like 4 or 5 times, and it kept morphing into this really weird like family friendly sing along musical by the end. And then like Tina Fey came into the room and was like, oh wow, this is really awful. And then Alec Baldwin was like, yeah, it doesn't matter, we're already making money on the movie. So what you're talking about with these hiding behind the family. Yeah, just
calling it family friendly gives you a pass for not having to actually make a good movie.
Well, and there's probably real math that happens in a corporate, like a conference room or something, where people sit down like, okay, we can make a really high budget, very well done, gritty, realistic movie and roll the dice at the box office to see if it's popular, or we can churn out this kind of piece of crap garbage movie for this much lower budget, and then like it's almost guaranteed to make at least this many dollars. So you can see in the corporate world how the risk aversion would be kind of easier. It's like you see all these direct to TV or direct to VHS sequels that Disney churned out.
I'm looking at you, Aladdin 2.
Yeah, we're looking at you, Return of Jafar. That movie was garbage.
Exactly.
And it was, but they knew, like, we can make this movie for next to nothing using half of the assets we had from the old movie, and it'll probably make money enough to justify its existence.
I want to agree with you in a way that sounds like I'm disagreeing with you, but Pixar is a great example where, it isn't just about gritty realism. It's also just about love and craft and creativity and storytelling that takes time and creative genius in order to create a end product that's worthwhile and successful.
Well, and this is the constant battle that you hear about in every form of media between creators and the corporations that are funding these creators. Because there is math being done in Pixar. It's like, okay, we can get these really highly paid people and put them in a room, and maybe after, hopefully, these thousands of hours that we've paid for them, they come out with something that will return on that investment. But there's no guarantee. Or we can take this intellectual property that they've already created and developed and make a sequel of it with a fraction of the cost in creativity time, and we're guaranteed to make at least some profit from it.
You're right. There's just some bean counters there that are doing some math, and maybe they're right. And to us, the consumer, it looks like, why'd they put out this piece of trash? And to them, they're laughing all the way to the bank because they didn't have to pay for the long production schedule or the high cost talent. Yeah,
I mean, because you can imagine these high cost talent guys being on salary for 18 months, 2 years at a time, and then maybe they have a good... It's like at the end of the 2 years, you can see them coming in the conference room with the corporate guys, be like, okay, guys, we've been paying you for 2 years. What do you got? Well, we've got this story, but we're still trying to flesh it out, and it's morphed a little over time, but we'll get you something. And then you just kind of see the corporate guys start squinting at them.
So there's another competing concept here that Mark Rosewater, the Magic head designer, calls creativity, restrictions breed creativity. I love when he talks about this because he talks about how, you think, oh, if I didn't have any limitations, then I could be the most creative. But he talks about how a lot of the limitations that exist in the rules and structure of Magic the Gathering make it so that he and his design team can do the most creative things.
And you know what?
And I think a good example is probably George Lucas in the Star Wars original Star Wars trilogy as opposed to the prequel trilogy.
Uh-huh.
You know, where when he did the original trilogy, they were limited by production, you know, their budget and the amount of resources and the technology, and it really was something awesome to look at. But then when he didn't have any of those restrictions, well, you know what happened.
Well, and that's the thing is like, oh, I have these restrictions on what I can actually film, so I guess I'm going to have to focus on characterization and story arcs instead of flashy effects. And yeah, and then he wonders why the prequels didn't do so well. But no, what you mentioned about
even their models flying through. Go ahead.
I'm gonna squeeze this point in. You're gonna let me land my plane. No, but what you were discussing about how the restrictions kind of give you the boundaries, like that happens all the time in any creative media. Like I remember the first time that really happened to me was one of the original Elder Scrolls games. I think it was Oblivion came out. And there's this tutorial for a couple hours where you're in this dungeon, like, and they teach you how the game works. Like, oh, here's the menus, and here's how you fight bad guys. And then you come out of this cave, and it's just this big open world, and you have like this generic compass that says kind of go that way. And I experienced opportunity paralysis. Like, it's like, wow, there's no restrictions. I can do whatever I want, and I just don't know what to do. And I put the game down and never played it again, just because I don't know, it just didn't grab me, and there was too many choices for me to make right off the bat. So, I mean,
opportunity paralysis. I love that term. Did you coin that?
I don't know if I coined that or if I heard it somewhere, but that's how I describe the feeling that I felt. It's like, oh, there's so many things I can do. I just don't know what to do with them.
I feel that way a lot. I hope I'm not dating myself here, but are you too young to remember Blockbuster Video?
Am I really, Ben? Like, I'm not that much
younger.
Oh,
come on.
I'm not 20-something. Yes, I remember.
Okay, so
my
you've been
parents sent me to
Video.
Blockbuster Video to go get movies.
You know, if you go to a Redbox now, you just have maybe like 30 choices max, and it's just the most recent or the most popular things, and that's it. But, you know, when you walked into like a Blockbuster Video, it felt like they had the entire catalog of every movie everywhere. I had a friend I used to go to Blockbuster with like every now and then, and we would spend like 4 hours there and walk out not having chosen anything. It was just opportunity paralysis is a great way to put it.
That's funny. I feel like we're going to date ourselves in this podcast years from, like, there's going to be some 14-year-old kid that puts this podcast in his head and he goes, what's Blockbuster Video? And then 30 seconds later goes, what's Redbox?
So I want to put that down as something. Well, I'll tell you a story real quick. So we were with my kids as we were leading up to Marvel's The Avengers Endgame. We were going back and probably doing like you do, although not in as awesome a way as you did, where we were watching all of the back catalog of the 21 other movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
And you have to watch them in order of production. That's not awesome. That's just the way you have to do it.
Right. That's what you were doing. We were just watching them. I was skipping ones I didn't feel like watching again, like Thor: The Dark World. Like, I get it. I just don't want to watch that again. And we were having a good time. And
I'm going to make the case for Thor: The Dark World. If you've never seen Thor: The Dark World, you should see it just so you can make fun of Natalie Portman and realize why everybody hates her and why they got rid of her out of the franchise after that movie.
And now we've talked about two bad Natalie Portman franchises.
What was the other one?
We'll see if we can... The Star Wars prequels.
Oh, I keep forgetting she was in that because the movies in their entirety are so forgettable.
Yeah. So what had happened is after Endgame came out, we went and saw it and liked it, and we kind of had a bit of momentum in the family. So it was like the next Wednesday night rolled around this summer, and there wasn't anything going on. And we're like, well, what do we do? So I asked my kids, and they had never seen the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie trilogy. I was like, okay. So we put that in. And some of it, I didn't realize that even though it comes from the 2000s, that the technology is already starting to be dated. So there was a scene where Peter and MJ are on the outs, and he goes to a payphone, and he calls her in her apartment, and her answering machine picks up. And he's talking to her, and he's like, please, MJ, pick up. And I looked over at my kids, and I realized they were utterly baffled by all of this.
Yeah, they have no idea what that was.
Like, he was on a payphone, she had an answering machine. Like, how is he able to pick up his phone and she can hear his voice in her apartment? Like, and why does he keep telling her to pick up? What does that mean?
That is
and
funny.
We actually had to pause the movie and explain all of this to my children. And I realized that, wow, the technology's also already come so far that my kids were only like, not that young are already confused by this.
My wife showed me a YouTube video not too long ago where there was these two teenagers, and they're in like their grandparents' house or something, and they started filming it. And these two teenagers buy a rotary phone, a landline rotary phone, and they said, "Okay, I'll give you $100 if you can dial this phone number in the next 5 minutes." And like the kids are like, what? And they're like, they just struggled for the entire. Like they didn't make
I've seen it.
Oh yeah,
they couldn't do it.
No, they're trying
couldn't do it.
They're trying to push the like. Do you like turn it? I don't get it. And like my favorite part of that whole video is like one little tiny clip where the one kid picks up the handset and goes, "Oh, it's making a weird noise," and like that clue being like, these kids have
they don't even know what a dial tone is.
They've never heard a dial tone. That's mind blowing.
Wow.
Well, I mean, think about you were talking about how fast technology goes. I remember when I first went to college, my parents got me a cell phone so I could call them, and it was the old Nokia indestructible brick that you see in internet memes now for being like the phone that never needed to be charged and could never be broken. And then 5 years later, after I graduated, there was the super thin Razr flip phone that I got because it was the new hotness on the market, right? It was like the thinnest,
you had
tiniest
one
phone.
of those?
I had one of those, and it was awesome. I was fresh out of college, like brand new professional. Of course, I'm going to have the slickest phone I can buy because I was full of myself and kind of a D-bag back then. But then, and then 5 years after that, I came back from first deployment, and that was when the first iPhone had come out. And like, just think about that. The 10 years from when I went to college to when I came back from that deployment, we went
to go from a Nokia brick to an iPhone.
The Nokia brick playing Snake to the iPhone playing what was Bejeweled. Bejeweled was the Candy Crush before Candy Crush was a thing.
I held out for so long. So long. I don't think I got my first smartphone until like 2017.
Oh, wow. Seriously? Okay, For those who are listening, we are recording like in September of 2019. So the fact that smartphones have been around for 10 years now, and you just got one 2 years ago, that blows my mind. What were you using before?
It was just a weird series of circumstances that leads me right into what I wanted to talk about next.
A weird series of circumstances where you had ancient technology?
So here's the thing. So let's go back to... it was kind of like... It was kind of I don't want to call it. Okay, I got to tell you a story about my dad. So my dad one time heard the ad campaign that Frito-Lay put on where they said, "Lay's, bet you can't eat just one."
Oh,
so my dad ate one Lay's potato chip and has since then never eaten a second. So now imagine that I was raised by this man.
So that's either an amazing story or a horrifying story depending on your perspective.
So when I've got my first, I even held out a long time. I didn't, buy a cell phone even in like the early 2000s. I would have like a prepaid phone that I would just top up the balance every now and then, and I mostly just didn't use it, which is weird because I was also getting on the internet. I published web pages. I had an email address. I mean, it wasn't like I was utterly disconnected. I was just resistant to the technology of mobile phones, and there was a lot of kind of caustic stuff going on with it back in the day with roaming charges and overages and all that kind of stuff, and I was just kind of glad to be on the outside for all of that.
You're really dating yourself, and this is the first time that I'm gonna say that you sound like kind of a curmudgeon, like one of those old guys like, I don't understand this newfangled technology the kids these days are using.
I'm aware I'm delving into that area. So back in the mid 2000s, my wife and I both got like prepaid throwaway phones that are like those Nokia bricks you were talking about, just for emergencies, and that's all we used it for. It was just to call each other emergencies. We didn't even text yet, and I was aware of the Razr phone and the smartphone thing, and I was just happy to let the early adopters work out the kinks and take all the overage charges on my behalf. Then we got orders to Italy in 2012, and I moved to Italy, and then it was really complicated and with getting a provider and having a contract, and then we moved to England, and everywhere I go I was provided with a government cell phone that was very much the equivalent of the Nokia brick. And I was just barely able to limp along with connectivity to others and stuff. And these phones texted, but I was doing, the hit the number 3 times to type.
Oh yeah, I remember
C.
my sister. That was like the T9 or whatever they called that texting method. She's 5 years younger than me, and so she was texting back on those old Nokia bricks, and she could do...
Was she super fast?
Yeah, she could do the T9 3-button clicks without looking at it and string like whole sentences together without ever having once looked at her phone. And like I never understood what the appeal of text messaging was until I got that first iPhone, when I realized, this is a way I can talk to people without having to talk to them.
So I was the right age to have been part of that, and just made a very conscious decision to deliberately jump completely over it. So when I finally got back to the States, I'm like, all right, I'm ready to make the plunge. I bought an iPhone 8, and here I am, just now it's like it's a normal part of my life, and I don't feel like I lost anything for those other years that I wasn't doing it.
Ew, iPhone. Gross.
Yeah.
All right, so I did say I bought the first iPhone when it came out. I have switched to the Galaxy, just the Android phones in general, and I couldn't be happier having Apple not like get its parasitic roots into my household, into my ecosystem. That's the only problem with Apple. Like, their products are great and they're flashy. The problem is, if you have one Apple product, it makes it just a ton more convenient to use other Apple products, and soon...
You nailed it.
Yeah, soon...
That was why I bought an iPhone.
Well, and then soon you find everything in your house is Apple OS or iTunes or iThis or whatever, and like, it's too much. I want the freedom to be able to choose the software I use, thank you.
Well, I wish I could take a photo of what my setup is right here, but I have my Microsoft Surface laptop sitting on top of a closed MacBook.
Well, as it should be. Yeah, this MacBook is only good for supporting my Apple's computer or my Windows.
It's only good for holding it up off the desk. Yeah. So I'm not completely in the parasitic Apple environment, but definitely I recognize the pull of their ecosystem and what kind of business sense that makes. So I told you all that because I want to tell you about when we moved to England. I was on exchange with the Royal Air Force. I mean, some people can go and do 5 years in Europe like I did in Italy and England and not really immerse themselves in the culture and the experience over there.
Oh, yeah, but not Ben Rich. Ben Rich is going to dive headfirst into that culture and come out the other side speaking with the accent and wearing
Sì, va bene, molto bene.
And wearing the Bath rugby shirt that he got on his season ticket holder status.
Well, but it wasn't just that. I mean, guys that go to like an American base in England, you can live on the base and work all day with Americans, and it's just like little America overseas. But I wasn't on that kind of tour. I was on an exchange tour, which meant that I worked in a British unit in place of a British person, which meant that every single person around me was British. And this was really cool. And like you said, and like you pointed out so adroitly, and I didn't realize until you pointed out last time, was that I like having these new experiences. I like doing things that let me see into other people's worlds and lives. So almost immediately after I got there, any American person that's ever had any exposure to media knows that, we don't speak the English language the same way they do, and it's not just accent.
Well, we don't speak the Queen's English.
You're absolutely right, but there's also the people's English that we don't speak as well, and that was the part I was fascinated with.
What's the
so almost immediately,
English?
The people's English is things like Cockney rhyming slang and Scottish colloquialisms. Okay. So almost immediately after I got there, I started to hear this in everyday speech in a way that I never had before. In a way that I hadn't seen depicted in media or picked up on reality shows or whatever. And I was fascinated, so I immediately started to make a spreadsheet of British vocabulary, words, phrases, and stuff like that. And it's very nuanced, and I'll do my best. But what I want to do is I want to create a feature on our podcast where I share a little bit of that, just one at a time.
So Ben is going to, from on high, try to educate us rural rogues.
This won't always be enlightening.
Yeah, he's going to try to enlighten us Commonwealth peasants as to the Queen's English.
So I'm going to start off with one that probably is the Queen's English. So today's British word of the day is bespoke.
Bespoke. You are bespoking to me right now.
Do you know bespoke?
I've heard it, but I don't know what it means out of context.
Bespoke is an adjective that means custom. If you look it up on Google and it pops up in the dictionary, it's funny, it comes up and it says adjective, British, made for a particular customer or user.
Okay, that doesn't sound like anything what that word should mean.
Right, which is why it kind of stood out to me at first when I got there. But the word bespoke means custom, and they use it anywhere we would use custom. Like if you saw a work truck with their logo painted on the side and they wanted to say custom cabinetry, it wouldn't say custom cabinetry, it would say bespoke cabinetry.
Huh.
And they use that word in place of anywhere where we would say custom, meaning that, made for a particular customer or user. So when I worked in IT, they used it all the time to talk about something that was built for purpose rather than commercial off the shelf.
And that's the next thing that I was going to ask you, because they probably said that in your staff meetings, like, oh, we're going to have this bespoke aspect to the system, and then you had to, in the back of the room, raise your hand. I'm sorry, what does bespoke mean? And then they all put their monocles on and scoffed at you while they sipped tea.
They were definitely sipping tea, but I never saw a monocle.
It's like, oh, the English chat doesn't know our verbiage. Everyone drink.
This was one of those funny words that not only did they not think I wouldn't have known it, like it didn't even occur to them that that wasn't a word that Americans use.
Huh. Well, and then that goes and speaks to the other side of the coin, where obviously their media doesn't show a lot of just common language American stuff, I guess. Like, you always see Hollywood movies are everywhere, so you just assume that our vocabulary is just out and about in the whole world and everybody knows what we're talking about all the time. But
there was this weird space I lived in where there's the stuff that they obviously know they're different about, things like Cockney rhyming slang. But then there was the other things that were just so commonplace to them that they didn't know, and this was one of them, which is why I chose it to start off. So, the British word of the day today is bespoke, meaning custom. See if you can use it in a sentence.
Oh, wow, really? We're going to go there? All right, so for everybody that doesn't realize, Ben has a very strong teaching background, and he taught back in the day. He teaches now on top of all of his other jobs and duties. So he just can't help but try to enrich the world around him.
This could also be like Super Troopers, and you could see how many times you could say meow in a traffic stop.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's that. So for all of the intellectuals that are listening, all 7 of them, try to use bespoke in a sentence today. For all of the alcoholic D-bags like this guy, you can't see it, but I'm pointing my thumbs at myself. See how many times you can use bespoke before your significant other looks at you like you're a crazy person.
Okay, so British word of the day was my idea for a repeating feature that I think is easily repeatable. And I suggested a few for you. Did you have one that appealed to you?
So you had put on the show notes for a recurring theme for me to do is like the game I'm playing right now. And I think that's a good one, but I kind of tweaked it a little bit to a game that I have played in the past because right now I've got 2 young children and a full-time job, and my wife works full-time, and my kids, they have karate and dance class and all the other things that little kids do. So I don't get a ton of time for games, so I kind of focus on one at a time and bounce around and rotate depending on what grabs my fancy at the time. So I have.
Can I say why I suggested this first?
Okay.
Because the reason I did is it seems like you and I, after we didn't live in the same location anymore, would just our paths would cross as either as circumstance permitted or as we made time and space to do. And it felt like every time I'd see you, there was some new game that you're obsessed with. And like you pointed out, I was always fascinated in learning about it, its ecosystem and the attraction and the differences. and to me, it was also fascinating how different they were. You didn't just do different flavors of the same thing, but sometimes the stuff you would try would be very different than the last thing. So I figured that would be interesting.
And that's part of the appeal to this whole thing. Like I talked about a little bit the last time, one of the biggest appeal to me for gaming is it gives you that space, that restrictive creative space that we were talking about earlier. And like, okay, here's the problem. Here's the space that you're supposed to work in. Now solve the problem. And then different formats will offer you different structures and different boundaries. So a card game is going to have intrinsic mechanical boundaries that a board game isn't, that a video game isn't, that a miniatures game isn't. And until you've tried everything, like you don't know what the pros and cons of the other things are.
So do you ever reach a point with one of the, like you'll pick a thing and then you'll feel like you've solved it and then you lose interest?
So I kind of. Actually, one of the games I used to play, Warhammer 40K, turned that way for me. It's like, the story is really, really good, and they do a lot of work with the lore behind all of the different aspects of the game. And so that really sucked me in and I really enjoyed it. But once I had played it for a few years, I started getting a grasp of like the mechanics and just like, so you can break it down like, okay, here's the rules, but then you start doing the math over, the cost benefit analysis and the quantitative analysis of what's the best way, the most optimal path to victory. And then like, it's almost like peeking under the hood and you realize, oh, well, this is just rock, paper, scissors. And it got to the point late in my career in 40K where, and like honestly, you talk to any like really hardcore Warhammer 40K player, any kind of Warhammer tabletop miniatures player, and they can tell you if they've been playing long enough, they know how the 4-hour game is going to end after the very first initial placement is done. It's like, okay, that's going to happen. This is going to happen, and he's probably going to win unless
I threw paper, he threw scissors.
Right,
in 4 hours, he's going to win.
But that's fine. The game was still fun. I still have a bunch of the 40K books sitting on my bookshelf in the office. I can look at them right now. and I'll pull them down from the shelf every once in a while and just start reading some of the story. Because like I said, this company did do an excellent job pouring a lot of resources into the writing and the art associated with it. And it's just really cool. Really gritty. It's a British company. Well, we're talking about
one
British
you've
stuff.
talked to me a little bit about, but you and I have like never actually played a game together. We'll have to do that someday.
We really don't. It's not.
Don't you still have a couple of armies and stuff?
I do. I need to get rid of those. But I mean, I have that stuff lying around. So for people who aren't aware, a miniatures game is you have little plastic figurines that represent units like troops or like a small army. And then you have rules that dictate how the army interacts with the other army. And like, okay, it's my turn. These guys are going to shoot these guys. And then you roll a bunch of dice to kind of add that random element of, oh, well, this bullet hit a tree or this bullet hit the guy twice or whatever. And so the outcome of the game is this back and forth kind of modern combat simulator sort of thing. So I have like hundreds of these figurines that are painstakingly assembled and painted by myself over the course of what has to be hundreds of hours, and they're just in.
So
a
why would you say that we
closet.
shouldn't play a game?
I wouldn't. This game wouldn't. I don't think it would appeal to you mechanically speaking. It takes a lot of initial. You have to have a lot of knowledge to get anything out of like your first game, and the games are very long. Like a standard, we used to play 2,000-point games, and they would take on average 4 to 6 hours to finish.
All right, you're revealing how well you know me.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where if you enjoy it, then you're going to have a lot of fun with it. But I wouldn't recommend that for somebody that's at like your level of nerdness, just because it takes, like, for example, one turn could take half an hour. In that half an hour, you're just kind of watching the other player play, and that takes a different kind of patience than different games do. This is what I found. Like, so I've introduced my immediate family, like my parents and my wife and my brother and my sisters-in-law and my sister and them, my immediate family. I try to get them into these board games, and I've realized one of the key points to get non-nerds to play nerd board games is that the turns have to be quick. You don't.
Yes.
Nobody enjoys watching somebody with greater knowledge of the game pull off some elaborate, super fun combo to them that just makes it impossible to beat, and so you're just sitting watching one person play. So if you want to have,
absolutely,
or
you pull out the manual and drop it on the table, and it makes a resounding thud. They're like, "I'm out."
Well, now, okay, there was one board game that I've introduced to people that it does have a very thick manual. And I told everybody, I was like, all right, I need you all to say yes to this. I'm going to bring out the most nerd hardcore board game that I've ever played in my life. It's got a really thick instruction book. It's going to take me 45 minutes to explain to you the rules of this game. And it's not going to click in your head until halfway through the first game. But I promise you, every turn is going to be less than like 2 minutes. And it's a huge board game, and it's got tons of pieces.
Really? So you're saying the limiting factor is the length of the turns?
I think that is one of the limiting factors.
They could sit through a 45-minute instructions as long as it was short turns. That's amazing to me.
Well, and I kind of strong-armed them. I told them, like, right off the bat, all right, everybody start drinking your beer now. Like, this is going to suck. This first part, the first part of me explaining you the rules is going to suck, but I promise you'll have fun once we get into it.
When you describe that, I'm wondering if I even have diplomatic immunity with my family like you described. You're like, okay, I know you guys aren't going to want to do this, but just let me make you.
Oh, no,
I don't think I could do that.
Well, and that's one of those currencies that you have with anybody in your life, right? I spent a lot of family currency that day. It's like, all right, remember last week when I helped you paint your house? All right, just shut up and sit here for 45 minutes while I explain the rules of this game.
Right. Yes, and we're usually not so explicit about it, but this transaction is always happening in the relationships in our lives.
Yes, definitely. You have these bank balances that you can't really quantify, but you have a good idea of how much you are owed or how much you owe.
So did you think of a game that you thought would fit for this feature? Like, what did you choose that you wanted to talk about today?
I don't remember. We've been talking about miniatures games for this whole time. I guess I can talk.
What was the name of the one that you spent the currency on with your family?
I was going to say, I guess since we're talking about that, I'll go with this one. And this is currently my favorite board game. If we're going to pick a genre, it's called Scythe, Scythe. I believe it was a Kickstarter board game. I think it was a Kickstarter board game, which is something else that I put on the
did we see it in that Geek Weekend in Dallas last year?
We saw it, but we didn't play it. I discovered that game at the previous Nerd Weekend in Dallas, and we played the first game, and like it was one of those things that reached my brain and just flipped enough of the switches. Like I remember like looking it up on my phone like for at least twice a week or every week after that, and showing it to my wife. And it's not a cheap game. Like the base set is like $80 or something. And she goes, "And how many players do you need?" I was like, "Well, it's best with 4 or 6 players." And she goes, "You're never going to get people to play with you." And I go, "I know." But one day I bit the bullet and just bought the game anyway. And then that's when I grabbed a couple of people that owed me some of that family currency. And I said, "All right, we're going to play this game once. And if you like it, great. If you don't, we never have to play it again. But I have to play this game again." And
so many pieces.
So it is, and this is the thing about that game. It is very intimidating to unbox the first time because there are a ton of pieces, and there is like I'm the one that usually sets it up, and it takes like 10 solid minutes of emptying baggies of little tokens and putting them on the board, and then setting these cards out and putting these little pieces on here. But what's good about this game is that there's a couple things. The first one is that there's multiple paths to victory. So we've had winners of that game. Like I have played it multiple times with the same group of people because after the first game, like, "You're right, this is actually pretty cool. The turns are fast and it's interactive and it's fun." So we get together, I'd say every couple of months, me and like 3 other guys, and play this game, and we have a good time.
I used to have so much patience for this. I don't know how to categorize it. It's like 2 levels beyond casual board games.
Oh no, and
people will excuse.
Yeah. We have to have another discussion. I remember the first time I
learned how to count out how much the initial cash of Monopoly was. Like, that was the most complicated that it felt like you could get. Like, in order to hand out someone's initial money in Monopoly, you got to give them 2 500s, 2 100s, 2 50s, 6 20s, and 5 10s, 5 5s, and 5 1s. So that's the initial amount.
Monopoly drives me nuts because it is the board game that everyone has in their house. And it was like, if you read the history of Monopoly, it was designed specifically to have frustrating mechanics. Like,
it's terrible.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
The board game was designed and implemented as a criticism against capitalism and how capitalism is bad. The game is...
It was intended to be satire and not a good board game.
It is intended to make people feel all of these angry feelings at each other and make them realize, oh, capitalism is driving my family apart. But yet, everybody has that in their house.
Would you agree with my assertion that Monopoly is kind of right on the edge of the amount of complicated to set up that is right on the border of casual gaming?
I could get behind that. That's probably the level where you have what, 2 decks of cards. You have more than that. You have the cards on the board. You have the money for the players. Each player has their piece, and then there's the properties that have to be sorted.
Yeah.
And that's it. But that's the limit of the things.
So, that's the maximum level of setup and complexity. But beyond that, it kind of goes outside of the realm of what casual board games are.
Yeah, that's probably on the outer edge. I believe. Yeah, I think you're right in saying that. That's probably the outer edge of what people will accept as a complicated board game. Now, to give people an idea of Scythe, there is 3 different types of token that sit on the board. There is each player has 3 different kind of pieces that they can move. And then they have 4 different types of resource tokens that exist on the board after they're produced that can be stolen between players. Each player has 2 separate player boards, one for their technology and one for their country. And each of those boards has multiple pieces that go on it that determine different rules of the game at any given point in time. There are wheels that you use for combat as a separate thing. There are cards that you use for combat as a separate thing. There are cards that you have for objectives above and beyond what you're doing.
So I Googled an image of this, and I'm looking at it. I'll put it in the show notes, and there's over 100 pieces.
Oh, easily. Easily over 100 pieces.
Which is kind of misleading. Like, if you count each individual bill in a stack of money in Monopoly, there's well over 100 pieces there as well.
Well, but Monopoly, like we just talked about, there's only like 3 or 4 categories of things. Like, there's the money, there's the property, and there's the cards. And then the pieces.
The dice and the...
Yeah. No, Scythe has probably a dozen different types of individual items that you play with during the game.
Right, exactly. So I was kind of giving a tier. So if you have like the casual board game from just like Uno, where you just have a deck of cards and everybody sits down, you can be playing in seconds, to Monopoly, that's like the full range of complexity of casual games. The next tier above that is kind of like the not really casual anymore. Scythe feels like one tier above that, if we're going in orders of magnitude.
Oh, yeah.
But it's still not the top.
No,
What would you say from your experience as a gamer that you would consider to be the pinnacle of complexity in board gaming?
Okay, I think there's 2 tiers past Scythe. And now I'm going to go through the whole thing. So we're talking like Monopoly, and Uno is probably the lowest tier. And then you've got Monopoly being the next like tier. Monopoly probably being the upper end of what a family would be expected to have normally mass produced in their house, right? I think the tier after that is a game like Settlers of Catan, which is you can still
that's a good example.
Yeah, you can. It's more complicated. Most people don't have it, but you can go buy it at like a Target, and like people that aren't into board games can pick it up in an evening, and they may or may not enjoy it. But it's simple enough that you can just open the box and play it without having had somebody who's played it before in the room explaining it to you.
And there's only like 3 categories of stuff. You know, you got your like stuff you build on the board, you got the resources you collect, and that's about it.
Right, and then there's interactions between the players that can make it more complicated, and it changes depending on what the board looks like. And yeah, so there's variability and stuff there. So I mean, that's if you're looking for a game more complicated than Monopoly, go for Settlers. I think that's a pretty solid bet.
Yeah, good example.
Yeah, the next level I think is where Scythe lives, and that's people that really enjoy. I'm not going to say complicated, but I will say complex, and those are 2 different things. The rules are very straightforward, but it gives you enough lateral movement within the game that you can achieve victory multiple ways. Like for example, one game that we played, somebody won by taking over all of the countries with their giant walking steam-powered robots, which was amazing. But another game, I won by sitting back in my corner of the board and harvesting the most wheat throughout the entire game, and I just racked up enough points doing that to win. Completely pacifist agricultural society won that game.
Darn it, Josh! You kind of tickled my curiosity funny bone there.
Oh, you like that?
Where you could have a game where you could win with a steampunk battle mech or by harvesting wheat.
You see,
that sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, and the turns are very short because I knew that was going to grab people because each individual turn lasts maybe 2 or 3 minutes tops, and that's if you're really thinking hard about it. And then it goes on to the next person and something else happens. So, like next time you're in town, we'll have to set that up, and I think you will really enjoy that game. It
sounds kind of like a game I've enjoyed called Puerto Rico. Have you played that one?
I have not played that one, no.
It feels like it's the same tier, but it's only about trading. There's no combat.
Okay.
But it's the same kind of thing. Your turn comes around, and there's like one of 4 main actions you can take, but you can only pick one, and you do that turn. I might be miscategorizing this if I got some kind of board game guru out there listening to me. But it's similar in complexity and number of pieces. All right, so what's the tier above that?
All right, so the tier above that is, I think you might have played this with us last time in Dallas. I think it was, if I cannot remember the name of this, it was the Undersea Madness game or the Cthulhu-ish one. I can't remember what it's called, but it was, each game lasts like anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. It is a board game, and it is the players versus the game. And this is another category. There's like Arkham Asylum, not the Arkham Asylum you're thinking of. There's the Batman Arkham Asylum video games that are very popular, but there's a board game called Arkham Asylum that is in this same category.
I think I've seen it.
Yeah, it's got a ton of pieces, and you have a big book of scenarios. It's because it's always the players against the board game. It's not the players don't play against each other. It's just you as a group trying to beat the mechanics of the game, and they stack the deck against you. It's very hard. And you need to if you win, you feel like you've achieved something. But there's an overall objective to each scenario, and then the board is always a little different, and then you have to pick one of a dozen different characters that you can play as that have unique little characteristics about them, and you try to synergize with your the other players to try to maximize your chances of beating this game. And it goes. You're just playing against the board game, and there's rules for how the board game operates. And so, you're like, okay, I think we can do this, and then you get some bad luck turn where the board state just swings radically against you, and it's just bad. That's probably the next tier of board game. I think that's it requires a whole nother level of involvement and understanding of the game before you can even sit down to play one game. Because if you sit down as a newbie, if nobody at the table has ever played the game before, then you stand no chance because you have no idea what advantages you need or what synergies that you need to create amongst the players to even stand a chance against what the game is going to throw at you in the first 2 or 3 turns.
So what would you consider to be the top tier then?
So the top tier is a game that I have never played before. It was a game that it was briefly demonstrated to me at the last Dallas one.
Don't say the name of it yet, because I was thinking of one and it might be the same one.
Oh, I don't know if it's...
Is it Twilight Imperium?
No, it's not. I don't know enough about Twilight Imperium to talk about it. Wait.
Okay.
Crap, let me Google it. Oh. Twilight.
So last month when I went to the family reunion, I have two, my brother and my brother-in-law, that are both big board game aficionados, and whenever they have a family get-together, they both bring a stack of games way bigger than we would ever have time to play, just in the hope that someone will want to have like an all-night bender. And they got out this game, and I gotta admit, I kind of avoided it, and other people played it, and I ended up not playing it, which is weird for me, because it's not like I had better things going on. I was just like, I don't know if I want to play that, and I decided not to.
Okay, I'm looking at pictures of it now, and I don't know. That's not the next tier that I'm talking about. This one looks like it would probably exist on the same tier as the one I'm referring to, where you're playing against the game. Because it does, yeah. It might be in with Scythe. I don't know. I'd have to play a game or two of it to see how complicated it got. But it does look interesting. I'm guessing just from the pictures.
This is something I like about your personality. You say I'm always open to new experiences. You're always open to new gaming experiences. You're willing to give any new game a chance. You'd be like, all right, if other people find this fun, maybe I can too. I'm in. I will dedicate all my brain power to this. I will learn the rules. I'll understand the board and the pieces and how everything interacts, and I will play this game. And sometimes I just feel like, oh my gosh, I cannot dedicate this much brain power to this thing.
Okay, no, so this Twilight Imperium does look impressive, and I would be interested in playing a game or two of it. But no, the next one down, and I can't for the life of me remember what the name is. If I do, I'll let you know, and we can put it in the show notes. But it was this... my buddy was showing it to me, and it was on Kickstarter only, and like the starter box is like $400 or $500 or something. And it's a game that you can tell that there is absolutely no mass marketability to it whatsoever. It is far too complex and far too nuanced. Like, it would never ever.
I think that was there when he was showing us. He had it like in his closet, and he had like 10 boxes of stuff for this game.
Oh, was you playing that with us? Where we fighting the lion?
No, I didn't play it,
oh, okay.
But I saw this, and I agree with you, what you're saying, that this is not mass market kind of appeal.
Oh, no.
This is very niche.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, if you see someone whose eyes light up when they see a game with more pieces than you can shake a stick at, this is the game for you.
Well, he had a giant stack of pieces.
Oh, my gosh.
The reason that I'm bringing up this game as the top tier is because it's a game that he and his roommate, had been playing the same game of it for like a month straight in multiple 6 to 8 hour sessions. And the idea behind this game is that it starts out as one thing, and then as you progress in the game, it becomes a different game. Like the mechanics change, and then like the objectives change. Like you start out as a single part, you're controlling one little piece on a board. And apparently you wake up in a cave with no memory, and the first task is you have to fight this lion. And apparently a lot of games end right there because you get killed by this lion. But you work together as a team, and with this weird combat mechanic they have. Yeah, you did play it. And killed the lion, but then it evolves to the next step where you're trying to build a small village, and it turns into almost like a civilization game where you're trying to manage resources and then use different people for different jobs, and then there's...
Remember how we were saying restrictions breed creativity?
Yes.
This is an example as if you have no restrictions that you just get out of control, and it's the end result is not useful or good.
Oh, no, and we talked about that a little bit too. It was like, who I asked him, like, who would make this? And then they explained, like, oh, well, this is the pet brainchild project. This guy, like, it's clear this guy like had one of those spiral notebooks from the 1980s. Like every once in a while he'd break out and like add notes to it. Like he was planning the mechanics and how this game would work for years. And like I feel like I could see this person going into different offices pitching, like, I want to make this game and it will sell at least 5 copies, and getting like the hard pass, like, no, sorry. But then Kickstarter became a thing, and he's like, okay, there's enough like power nerds out there that'll be interested enough that I can just get
any game company executives. I just got to please myself.
And it's I swear it's one of those games where it's so complicated. Like, there is no chance that he made any kind of a profit making this game, but it was something that he just had to get out of his soul. Like, I want this to be a thing in the universe so badly that I'm willing to take the chance on it. And if he has made money on it, then, well, good for him. But there's just no way. That's a whole nother level of complicated.
anyone that designs games like that you can play for a month, one, doesn't have children, and two, that just has to dedicate a whole chunk of their life to that kind of thing. So that brings me to something else I put in the notes that I want to talk about today. I want to talk to you about my unified parenting theory, because this is something I've been working on for a while, and I've never actually talked to you about it. Are you done talking about board games?
Wow, that was a rough transition. But yes,
Sorry.
I mean, we can talk about board games I could talk about board games all day, but for today, I think we're good talking about board games.
Okay, so I kind of got a head start on you on the whole having children things, but I like how we were able to maintain a friendship even though while you were still a single carefree guy.
Stop. Nope. Hang on. Time out. All right. Oh, I guess I got a little of a head start. For everybody that's listening, Ben had 5 children before I was married, I think. So if we would consider that a little head start, sure, that's fine. Go ahead.
You're right. Samantha was born after you were married. So You know the old maxims and jokes about parenting, about how there's no manual, there's no rule book to follow, and everyone just has to kind of do their best. And once you become a grown up, you realize, kind of behind closed doors, that no one knows what they're doing, and we're all just making it up as we go along.
Right. Yep.
Well, from our own backgrounds, and I think you and I fundamentally have very similar philosophical foundations for what we think the goal of parenting is. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think my ultimate goal is to turn these miniature, immature beings into functioning adults.
We do have okay, so there's a spectrum that we're shooting for, right? For the end result of your children. But I am a much more pessimistic person than you are, and so what defines the bottom of my spectrum of success is biologically alive at the age 18. If my kids are physically still alive,
that's a really low bar.
But that's the point, right? I'm gonna have, if I have a low bar, then it doesn't matter how terrible they turn out, I can still high five, we did it, high five. Now, obviously, you would want the upper end of that spectrum is President of the United States. So, that just gives you a range to shoot for. If you define success large enough, then you're always going to achieve it.
So early in my marriage, when I was still committing acts of marriage suicide, I would come home and the house would be chaotic, and my wife, with 3 little kids, and I'd be like, "What did you do all day?" I learned that you should never say that.
You said that, and then you woke up the next morning with a large lump on your head.
Yeah. Well, aside from that, she would also define the bar that you just defined. She's like, "They're all still alive," and I'd be like, "So, that's your standard of success?"
Oh, from day to day, that is absolutely your standard for success. Whenever we have babysitters come over, they're like, "Okay, well, I'll take good care of your kids," and I stop them. It's you can take terrible care of our kids. That's fine, as long as they're alive and we get back. That's what we're shooting for.
So obviously there's all the usual things where you're trying to just get them to make the milestones. You want to teach them to crawl and walk and run and learn to talk and have conversations and stuff. But almost immediately you start to learn that you also want them to obey you. You want to have them recognize your authority, acknowledge your instructions, and then carry those instructions out. Well, at first... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, obedience is mandatory if you're going to have, children versus, small bears that live in your house. They have to follow the rules. Yeah, but that's
nowhere in your goal of make it to 18 and still be alive.
Well, no, but that's.
You can meet that goal with a medically induced coma.
You're taking this the wrong way. The biologically alive is the low bar, Ben. That's the low bar. Obviously, all right. We're shooting higher than that. But that's at the end of the day, if all else fails, we can still define success if they're alive. Yes, you want your children to be productive members of society, but that some of that is out of your power. Some of that, not all.
So in this making it up as we go along thing, the first goal I realized, and at the time I thought it was the only goal, was that I needed them to obey me. And this started to take a form and a little dialogue that I developed between myself and my children, where I would tell them that I wanted them to acknowledge that I'd given them an instruction and then carry it out. And so we had a little phrase that I would say. I would tell them what to do, and then I would say, and if they argued with me or didn't acknowledge, I would say yes, Daddy, and do it. And that was our little script that we would follow. And it reached a point where they started to use it against me, and they would say it in a sing-song, mocking way. Like, I would tell them to do something, and they looked like they weren't going to do it, and I'd put my hands on my hips and maybe roll my eyes, and they would go, "Yes, Daddy, and do it." And then they would go do whatever it was.
Well, that's pretty good. That's better than the phrase that I had for my kids when you're in the obedience stage. You're like, okay, go do this. And the kid, like, they get to that age where like, well, why? That's not what I want to do. And they would look at me and they go, why do I have to go brush my teeth? My response was, because I'm the alpha and the omega. Now go do it.
Because I will end you. I brought this into the world. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because as far as you're concerned, I am the creator. Now get to work.
Yes. So yes, Daddy, and do it. And as I developed what I'm calling my unified parenting theory, each time I expanded it, it was because I realized that I'd achieved my goal and realized that it wasn't the end. So in this situation, once I'd gotten my kids to be able to say yes, Daddy, and do it, and the first time that happened, and I realized I'm still not satisfied.
Well, of course you're not satisfied with just obedience. I
don't know. At first, I thought that was the only goal.
That's what prison inmates are. Like, yeah, they're obeying, but that doesn't make them good people.
Right, and that leads to a whole category of things I call malicious obedience, which is where they do exactly what you told them to do in a way that's very, I can't think of the right word, insubordinate.
Yes, they're following the letter of the law, not the spirit of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, and the spirit of the law kind of gets at what I determined the second goal is. So the first time I told my kids, and they said, yes, Daddy, and do it, and did it, and I wasn't satisfied, I realized that I also wanted them to say, and this is the script we developed, what else can I do to help?
Ooh.
And so once I started telling them, and they would say, yes, Daddy, and do it, and I'd still be mad, they'd be like, what are you still mad about? I don't want you to just do what I asked. I want you to recognize that there's more to be done, and I want you to say, what else can I do to help? And so then they started to learn that. And those are two big steps. I mean, to first learn to obey and follow instructions. When you start with a brand new kid, it's limited to like something line of sight in the same room. And as you develop their capacity, then you get so you can send them out of sight and they can do multi-stage things. That's high-end obedience.
Oh yes, we're just reaching the stage where we're introducing that to my daughter, where like she still needs like supervision to shower correctly. It's like, did you use soap? And then she just stares at you. You wash your hair again. But
exactly.
But I did wash my hair. I'm like, yeah, but you took too long to answer, so I'm going to watch you do it this time. But then like she'll get out of the shower and I'll wrap her in her towel and go, okay, what are you going to do next? And then the first couple times she was like, and then after that, you're going to go dry off, you're going to get dressed, and you're going to brush your teeth. And then now, that was like, a couple months ago. Now I ask her, what are you going to go do next? She goes, I'm going to dry off, I'm going to get dressed, I'm going to brush my teeth. So she knows the next steps. Executing those steps is still, wishy-washy. But, I mean, that's the developmental stages, right?
Yes. And when you only have one or two kids, and trust me, I don't at all look down on someone with one or two kids. My wife and I go to great lengths to never sound like we're being condescending towards people because we have 6 kids. I don't.
I can't imagine you being condescending to anyone about anything.
Okay. Well, because we try not to. So not at all condescending, but when you're trying to teach 6 people obedience and they're all in various stages, it can get really complex unless you're formal about it. So I don't know if I ever showed you, or I probably did. We developed a system where we kept tokens and recording devices in order to be able to keep track of this and help develop it.
Yeah, and that only makes sense because you were vastly outnumbered and you had children that you're responsible for at multiple stages of development, and so you would have to bring structure to that entire process, or else it would fall to pieces.
You got it. And it was about learning what disciplines were relevant and most effective with each child, and what incentives motivated them to want to be obedient, and those kinds of things. And once we learned it, we were able to fine tune it and develop some pretty obedient kids. And then I realized that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted them to be committed. So the first phase was learning obedience, and the second phase is being committed, which isn't just doing what Daddy said. It's also then sticking around and saying, what else can I do to help?
Is that
And so
is
I
that the
started
right
telling my
word?
kids that.
Is that the right word though? Like we're talking about, like is that commitment or is that just like you're almost contributing at that point? Like you want them to have initiative. You want them to actively seek the opportunities to assist.
You're skipping ahead to the third phase.
Well, that's how. Well, I don't know. I think we're going to have a semantical argument.
I'm
about
going
that.
through this developmentally because I was developing as a parent. Just like I said, we're all making it up as we go along. Well, so was I. I thought what I needed was obedient kids, but what I actually need is kids who are obedient and committed, who will stick around and say, what else can I do to help? So I started telling them that, and they started doing it. Well, one vignette I can give that's a good illustration of this is trying to set up a tent with a child, like a big tent with lots of poles and stuff.
Okay.
Where you have the situation where, like, if you're pulling the wrong direction at the wrong time, it just makes it worse than better, and having help doesn't actually help.
Oh yeah. If anybody, if for the people listening to this podcast, if you don't have like you think like, well, any kind of help is help, right? Have a 4-year-old help you with anything. Their help is worse than destructive.
Yes. So there's a difference between being able... Eventually, life just reaches a point where being able to tell someone else something to do isn't sufficient in order to get on with life. You need the other person not only to be obedient and committed, but you need them to be responsible and have a vision for what the end goal is. And so... after the first time I had a kid say, yes, Daddy, and do it, and then say, what else can I do to help? And I still wasn't satisfied. I learned that there was a third phase. And the third phase is what you were just getting at. And that's where I think not only are you obedient and committed, but you learn responsibility. And that's about understanding what the mission is. You know, what are we trying to accomplish here? And so the way I articulate that to my children is find something that needs to be done and do it. And it's beautiful, Josh. It's beautiful when kids learn this phase where they, you know, when you're setting up a tent and you can just do it silently and cooperatively because the other person understands what a tent's supposed to look like and they know what direction to push the pole at the right time and where to put the stakes and how to put things in. It's fantastic.
That is an interesting way to approach that problem. I do like that. And I'm going to actually start implementing that. Like, is that question by itself, like if you pose that question enough, then hopefully it'll become something that recurs in the kid's brain. I'm going to start asking my son, like when he's sitting around on a weekend and me and Nicole are, you know, busting our chops trying to get all of the end of week chores done, all the dishes done, all the crock pot filled with dinner for tonight, and then the laundry folded and things. I'm just going to ask him, it's like, what do you think needs to be done right now? Yeah. And at first he's not going to know anything, but maybe after a couple of months he'll think of a couple of things that he could do, and that'll be helpful.
That's great. And I like how you saw the vision of it, because that's exactly what it was. And once I did it, I explained it to my kids. I'm like, hey, I thought I was trying to get you to just learn to be obedient or obedient and committed, but what I actually want you to learn responsibility and be responsible. And so sometimes I'll tell my kids, they'll be like, oh, I was obeying what you said. I'm like, yeah, you're on level 1 right now. I need you at level 3.
So I can argue with you, I think, all day about the words that you chose there. I would like to replace responsibility with initiative, because I feel like those two are different.
So obedient, what do you say instead of committed?
So like your commitment, that's where you're asking them, it's like, what else can I do to help? I think that's just kind of I think I would almost call that awareness. Just being
obedient, aware, and then initiative.
Yes. I think just that next level is like, you want the first level, yes, you just want your kids to obey. The second one, I think you just want your kids to be aware that there are things that have to happen or things that need to happen in addition to what I've just told you. Right?
Now, there's a fourth one.
Ooh.
That I'm not including here because it's not really parenting. The fourth one is now they get to go out and set their own mission and their own goals, and then
that's not really
wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah, you're right. That's not really parenting. That's just you just have to hope that you've laid the groundwork in such a way that they are capable of making those plans responsibly and correctly, and they can implement.
But in being obedient, aware, and initiative, it's all kind of assuming that they're executing whatever my mission and goals are as the parent. Whereas someday they're going to get to set their own.
Well, but that's the thing. That's a more meta thing that has to happen, because while you're parenting and creating the structure, not only are you teaching them the obedience, the awareness, and then the initiative, but then like in the background the entire time they're kind of seeing what things that you do, what things that you choose that are important. Like when you guys go camping, I presume that everybody has different responsibilities, and then the things that you see that need to be done, that you take care of, versus the things that your wife sees that needs to be taken care of and need to get done. Your kids notice that, whether they make positive or conscious thoughts and memories of like, oh, well, daddy's choosing to do this while mommy's choosing to do this. That's irrelevant. They still see that, and that's still, contributing to their development. And so someday, when they're faced with that opportunity paralysis, stepping out of college with their degree, and they have to go out in the world and make their way, they'll have some kind of subconscious drive to, okay, well, these are the things that my parents found important, and hopefully it's, the basics like shelter and food, a stable income, that kind of stuff, the things that you need to live first, and then they start developing from there.
Yeah, and I'm getting to see this now as my children are starting to leave home and stuff, and see, did I do it? Am I successful? Sure, they made it to 18 and they're biologically alive, but
yeah, so no,
can they
at that
go out
point,
and be a...
That's the thing. They're 18, they're biologically alive, and they're out in the world. You're done. Forget them. Like, delete them from your phone contacts. You don't have to worry about it anymore.
As amusing as it is to hear you say that, we both know how deeply we love our children and what we actually, what the top end of what we hope and dream will become looks like.
Listen,
and I gotta tell you, man,
my hopes and
my
dreams.
oldest is 19.
Yeah,
he just left home, and he is exceeding my expectations for what the top end is.
Well, that's
he's
good.
Really doing good.
That is fantastic. But like, as much as he's exceeding your expectations, that doesn't stop his room from becoming a hot tub. Like in the next 3 to 6 months. Like that's how it works.
Maybe. Yeah. All right. So I wanted to mostly just introduce my unified parenting theory to you, because I think of it in those terms now, and I may refer to it again in the future. And now that we've had that discussion put out of the way, I can just refer to it by shortcut.
I know.
They were doing say yes, daddy, and do it, but I wanted them to say what else could it do to help, or find something that needs to be
Listen, I know exactly what you're doing. All right, so the primary objective here is you want to have something to talk about on this episode of the podcast. The secondary objective is to introduce a common vocabulary that the two of us can use when discussing parenting topics. But let's face it, Ben, the tertiary objective here is you want this to be a thing out in the world, so when you write your book, people will go buy it. Don't you slide that past me like, oh, I'm just trying to contribute to our podcast. No, there's some self-service here too, I bet. If you haven't,
the fact that I may have already started the outline for said book.
I knew it. That was the next thing I was going to say. Like, I bet you $10 that you've got that outline on your computer somewhere.
Yeah.
It's way too formal for you not to have written it down.
Thank you for helping me refine the vocabulary for describing my unified parenting. That's all I want to say about that, though.
That's good.
Something else I had in here that you brought up in the last episode that I was interested in hearing your thoughts are, because I've heard you talk about this before, but I don't know what your latest burr under the saddle is about humans queuing.
Yes, queuing is a very British term, isn't it? But it's forming the fact that people will form a line and wait their turn, or they're supposed to. Yes. That's my...
Yes.
Yeah, we mentioned this in the previous episode, and I said that. Like, that's, I believe, the one key characteristic that separates human beings from, the primordial soup is the fact that we will stand in a line and wait our turn. And it speaks to...
Do other animals not stand in line?
All right, you go ahead and answer your own question there. Do other animals stand in line, Ben?
Of course they do.
What animal stands in line and waits their turn?
While you were saying that, I thought of at least 3.
Okay.
How about ants?
Ants walk in a line because they're... All right, so ants are less individuals as they are part of the hive mind. Like, they are cells in a larger organism achieving an objective. And no, ants walk in a line because that line, it's some set.
So you're saying there's some... The human being act of standing in a line is evidence of a much higher cognitive process.
It's not the physical act of standing.
Social
in a line that I'm
contract.
Yes, it's the fact that there is a thing. There is some thing that we all want, and instead of mobbing it like a group of gorillas, we're all going to stand in this line and recognize we have our higher brain functions that are suppressing the immediate desire to own and have the thing. But our logic takes over and dictates, you know what, this will be much more orderly and much better for everyone if we were all to just stand in a line and wait for our turn. And this is like the lowest level of social contract is first come, first serve. That is something that every kid implicitly understands. And that's why any second grader will get really upset and just just completely flabbergasted when somebody breaks this social contract and cuts in line, because even a second grader recognizes that all social structure would break down if people just did whatever they wanted. And this is the first tier of it. And every other complex interaction that we have as humans builds on this idea of suppressing our individual needs for the benefit of the group, or for the fact that it will be better for me in the long run if I suppress this now and just wait my turn later.
I agree with you that children have like this inexplicably strong, innate sense of justice and fairness that I don't know why, because I remember my parents repeating to me ad nauseum, life's not fair. Life's not fair, they used to say, and it wasn't. But I don't know why kids are born thinking that it's supposed to be. Why don't we just expect that to be the status quo? Life's not fair, and if it ever is, you can be pleasantly surprised.
Well, and but that's the reason. Like, everybody feels from the beginning that there is some sense of justice or some sense of fairness that we all have. And if we all abide by these rules that may or may not be explicitly written down, then that's what's fair for everybody. It's like the first come, first serve, standing in a line. It's most votes win. My kids, actually, I've implemented this, and I wanted to tell you I was super proud of it. My kids started arguing. My daughter's old enough now to argue with my son about random stupid things. Like, oh no, I wanted that toy, or I wanted the last chip out of the bowl, or whatever it is. And just randomly on a whim, when they were fighting about something, like, oh, it was breakfast. Okay, do you guys want eggs or pancakes? One says eggs, one says pancakes at the exact same moment. And I don't know why, but out of the blue, I go, okay, rock, paper, scissors for it. And the kids they recognize, they understand what rock, paper, scissors is. They turn to each other, okay, and my family does it the correct way. It's rock, paper, scissors, then you shoot. Then you show what you're throwing, not on three. I mean, people that do it on the third is rock, paper, scissors.
You have to define this.
Well, because there's two ways of doing it. There's the wrong way, and then there's the way we do it. But so they both did it, and then, one person won, and it was amazing, this moment, because the other person goes, oh, okay, I guess we're having the thing. And it was like, it was great because it wasn't me. Like, they see me as some, random arbitrator of justice that just, whatever I feel like I do. So they don't really respect my opinions on things, like disputes like that. They feel like I'm a biased party, I guess. But
kids also have this tendency where they'd be like, okay, I'll play this game because I don't mind playing the game, and hopefully I'll get my desired outcome. But then if the game outcome is revealed and I don't get my desired outcome, then I'm going to throw a tantrum anyway.
But you know what? This is what surprised me, is that they didn't. And they haven't. Whenever I have them rock, paper, scissors for something, like they grumble, but they don't completely melt down the way that they would if I came down and said, no, we're going to do it this way. They would fight me much harder if I said it versus if they lost the rock, paper, scissors. It's almost like they feel like the universe has come down and given them this decision, not me.
Now, how many times would you say you've done this?
I've probably done it a couple dozen times for random little things. Nothing ever super important.
And has the outcome come out, would you say, other than the expected 50-50 outcome? Like, does one of them always pick one and the other one knows that? And
well, my son, they're perfect ages for this, because my son is just old enough to try to understand that there's another game that's happening when you're playing rock, paper, scissors. But my daughter has no idea, and so she's just throwing random stuff. So whatever system that he's coming up to implement just does not work, because he's just basically playing against chaos. So it comes
I remember playing tic-tac-toe back before I knew that it was solved, and feeling like there was suspense of who was going to win.
And that's a developmental stage in of itself, right? Where you can abstract the rules of this game and realize, wait a minute, there can never be a winner if everybody plays perfectly.
Right.
That's the first.
And it's not that hard.
No, it's not that hard to figure that out. No, but so I'm lost on a roadmap. How do we get to the rock, paper, scissors thing?
Okay, so we started talking about standing in line.
Oh, the standing in line, yes. That was the justice, the innate sense of justice. Is my kids will rock, paper, scissors.
Kids have a sense of justice.
Yes, and then they rock, paper, scissors to solve the dispute, and for some reason they feel like that has solved the dispute, and that was a fair way to do it, and they both accept the outcome of the pseudo-random rock, paper, scissors game. So that's just the...
So...
Go ahead.
Tell me about how, if you have a social construct that we've all agreed that first come, first serve, and that's just the best for everybody so that we can all get the thing we want, how you feel about someone cutting in line.
So we're skipping to the... that is a person that is not only being selfish, but they know. everybody knows if there's a line, you're supposed to stand in the line. And if you're skipping the line, I don't care what your justification is. You are making the deliberate decision to break the social contract. And what your threshold is for the importance, like I have this reason for breaking the social contract, and it is a good reason. Like your level of what is a good reason might not coincide with everybody else's level of what is a good reason. And so I remember, this was years and years ago now, my wife was still pregnant with my son, but we went to Disneyland with some of her nephews. And I remember standing in these long lines for sometimes an hour or more at a time. And then people would try to jump in with their friends at the last minute. And I'd throw them out one time physically, because like, this is not how this works. You understand that we've all been here for an hour and a half, and you don't get to roll in here at the last second and get the benefits that we've all waited an hour and a half for. That's not how society works. Nothing works this way. There is no justice here. And guess what? I'm bigger than you, so I'm going to implement my version of justice. And that's I guess, kind of the...
There's a video I saw on the internet that's one of my favorites, where there's like it looks like a train in the French subway, and there's a woman standing in the doorway blocking the doors from closing. Have you seen this one?
No,
put
I
it
don't
in the
think
show
I have.
notes.
Yeah, do that.
Oh, I love it. She's blocking the doors from closing. It's holding up the train, and you can see the passengers on board are getting kind of distressed. And then some guy resolutely walks up behind her, and like right out of the
movie
Frank,
300, does he just kick her out?
300, he just kicks her right off the train. Just, this is Sparta. Just nails her right off the train.
Dude, what's funny is that's the first thing that I thought of when you were describing this situation. Like, the doors won't close as a person's in the way. I'm like, oh, well, you just need to Spartan kick that lady right off of the platform.
And he does, and it's beautiful.
Because that's the only... But like, the fact that me and this random stranger on the other side of the planet came up with the same solution should tell you right there. There is innately understood social contracts that some people break for reasons that they think are good that aren't accepted by other people. And there are resolutions that are also universally understood. Like, I bet nobody on that train was like, oh, well, you shouldn't have kicked that poor lady off the train. I think everybody else was like, good. I'm glad he did it before I had to.
Yeah, and it's more than that. I mean, like, holding a train up could cause like delays to the entire line. It could even cause safety problems. I mean, it's not just one person inconveniencing several hundred people.
Nobody's thinking of that because they're the star of their own life. Like, oh, I don't want to have to suffer the inconvenience of waiting 10 more minutes for the next train. They're just worried about themselves, and they're not. That's the problem. I think that needs to go in your unified parenting theory, is you need to imbue this idea into your children that it's not just you. You're not just alone in the universe. There's other people around here, and you need to have at least some of your brain dedicated to, like, what am I doing right now that's causing other people inconvenience?
You are right, and I have a phrase for that.
Okay.
And I use it a lot when it's inappropriate. It sounds kind of funny when I do, but my children, I realized this when I would take several of them out in public. They would do the game where they were just playing slap and tickle, just... whatever, fooling around, just dancing around, and invariably it would lead them to bump into a stranger.
That does sound really bad out of context, the slap and tickle. You need to change that to tomfoolery or something. Like, come on, Ben.
I reversed it to be called slip and tackle, because that's what it turns into, is you're fooling around, they're playing, and they bump into a stranger. And so to describe that situation, I would grab them by the shoulders, look them in the eye, and say, you are doing the kind of things that make you bump into strangers. And that became my phrase for describing that kind of behavior, where you're so focused on your life and what you're doing to that you find to be interesting or pleasurable, that you ignore the fact that you might be having negative externalities on other people, and that you have to acknowledge their existence.
That's really interesting, because I've talked to my son about that multiple times while we were at our latest trip to Legoland, just standing in line, and the kids mess around like they do, and just grabbing them and making, hey, what are you doing right now? Are you aware of how close you are to other people? Like, where are you physically in the universe?
Yes.
And what you're doing is going to cause inconvenience. What's funny though is I'm a big person. Like, I'm just tall and I'm wide, and so I always, ever since I was I think in middle school or high school, somehow my parents embedded this sense into me that I need to be aware of where I am physically, because it's very easy for me to block up an entire hallway and not realize it, right? So whenever I'm out and doing things, I'm very conscious of like where I'm standing. Like, for example, if you walk into a restaurant, you go to the hostess stand, like, oh, I've got 4. I mean, she goes, okay, hang on a second. Like then I immediately look around like, okay, where can I stand where I'm not blocking anybody's path while I'm waiting for this person to do this thing? And it becomes a conscious decision whether I'm blocking the way to stop people from trying to cut me in line, or if I'm out of the way just waiting for my service to be taken care of.
So if you try to think about that awareness of your physical presence and your inconvenience to others, do you feel like you were taught that by someone, or you just kind of developed it?
I don't know. I feel like I have to have been taught that at some point, because how would I develop that naturally? But here's the thing, is since I have that, and I'm trying to be aware of other people around me, and I'm trying to make my children aware of other people around them, it makes me very, very aware of people that do not have this in their life. People that just have absolutely no sense of where they are. I drop my daughter off at daycare every morning, and you have to sign her in on a clipboard, and you have to push your thumb to this fingerprint scanner. And I swear to you, Ben, every single day, there is a parent that is standing in front of one of these two vital things, chatting away with the lady that's running the daycare, and every day I'm
not even
just
aware of the fact that they're blocking everyone else's day.
There's like 2 or 3 people waiting to sign their kid in, and it's like, excuse me, you need to get I'm not going to swear, but I really want to. You need to move physically out of the way. Please continue your conversation, but you need to get out of the way.
Right, so that everyone else's life can go on.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was blocking the fingerprint scanner that you have to touch before you can leave.
Right, and that's the thing. This goes back to the social justice and the contract thing again. It's like they're the star of their own life isn't even like they know they have to sign in. Everybody's aware that everybody else has to do this, but they never think about it. It never entered their calculus that they are stopping other people from doing a vital function because they just don't care.
So I would posit that just like how you and I are conscious of the fact that our children are doing the kinds of things that make them bump into strangers, and we're taking a moment to stop them, like when you're standing in the line at Legoland, put their hands on their shoulder and say, are you thinking about what you're doing with your body right now? Do you realize? Because of course, when my kid bumps into somebody in like the grocery store or waiting in line, they didn't hurt them.
Right, but it's still that inconvenience, and you don't want that to happen to you.
But we're using that small situation to try to teach them a larger concept, which is this concept of being aware of how you are participating in the social contract. And part of that is not inconveniencing or hurting or bumping into other people.
Right, and this feeds back into my original point why the line is so important, because just the way that math builds on itself, once you have addition, you can understand multiplication, which allows you to understand division, which allows you to understand algebra, which allows you to understand calculus, which allows you to understand the universe. Once you have an understanding of the very basic social contract and what your place is in it, that gives you the abstract foundation to then build upon that and understand the higher levels of it. Oh, this is social responsibility. This is my duty to the public at large. And this is my moral obligation to do certain things in certain situations.
At its earliest, it sounds ridiculous when it comes out of the mouths of parents, when it's reduced to simple rules like, honey, we don't poke people in the bottom. Whatever, whatever it is. I'll never forget this time my sister and I were waiting in line in the DMV, and there was these hard plastic benches that were smooth in texture, and this mother had her child with her that was probably 4 years old, and my sister and I were right directly behind her in line. And at some point, I think this child, I don't know how, got the idea in their mind that they were going to lick this bench all the way across. And the mom had her back turned, and this child starts at one end of this bench in the DMV and starts licking it, and they go so far that their tongue gets dry and starts to stick, and they get stuck. And then this kid stops halfway across the bench with the slug trail of saliva behind them, and stops and kind of smacks their mouth until their tongue gets wet enough that they can continue the trail. And my sister and I are just laughing so hard. And this kid gets enough spit in their mouth, goes back down, and licks that entire bench, one end to the other.
All right, so this is
he laughed so hard.
This is the intersection of the weird things that kids do and stuff that would only ever happen at the DMV.
Right, but also, but the point I was making about that is, if the mother had seen it, what would she have said to the child?
Don't lick benches.
Right, honey, we don't lick benches at the DMV, which is a stupid rule. Like, if you're writing that down in the comprehensive rule book of every rule parents make for their children, but really it's getting in an underlying part of this social construct, you know.
Exactly. The little things build up to bigger things. Like, all right, so we need to have like a recurring section of the stupid things our kids have done that spawned a very complicated conversation. I have one, right?
Because I have another one.
Oh man, I've got one right off the top of my head. I want this one. So my daughter is turning 5 in a couple of months, and probably a month or two ago, we were in the drive-thru for Starbucks, just getting coffee or for my wife, and I get the milkshake frappuccino thing because I don't like coffee. But it was this, very.
I don't know if I knew that.
It was a very excellent employee. Like, Starbucks usually employs pretty good people. If you're going to one of the more populated ones, like they have really sharp, really quick, they work hard. And so this girl, I'll call her a girl because she couldn't have been older than 19, was taking our order and processing the payment and then handing it to us at the drive-thru window. And she was Asian. And I'll never forget how embarrassed I was because I'm receiving the drinks from her and my daughter in the back seat at top volume because that's the only volume kids have at that age.
Sure.
She goes, "Daddy, what's wrong with her face?"
Oh no,
right? And it's just one of those moments where it's like, yeah, sorry. And I take the drinks and like, thank you very much. Have a great day. And I drive off. I'm like, Jane, oh God. And I just put my head in my hands like how do you explain racism to a 5-year-old? Yeah. Okay, so and that spawns a very in-depth conversation of, so
she's not capable yet of understanding it, even if you tried to explain it.
Yes, and
so you have to just make a dumb rule.
Exactly. So you break it down.
Honey, we don't lick the bench at the DMV.
Yeah. So me and my wife later that day are in this situation. It's like, okay, so what is the lowest level, easiest implementable rule for anti-racism that we can come up with?
Uh-huh.
And I think what we landed on was we don't point out other people's physical traits, like ever. If they're fat, if they're tall, positive or negative.
I'd be nervous to say that, but I understand your daughter's young enough that would have to be like you said, the lowest level.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It has to be the easiest to digest and understand version of it possible. And then that's like later. Like, right now we're in stage 1. Obey this rule. Later,
right?
Like when you're older, we'll explain to you why this rule was important, or maybe you'll just pick it up from context. Like, it's not nice to point out people of different races because that's a social faux pas at its best and a hate crime at its worst.
So another version of that has nothing to do with race. Is that all babies are beautiful and all brides are beautiful. Just this, like, we give diplomatic immunity to certain groups of people.
And we give diplomatic immunity to people at certain times of their life.
So when my fourth son was born, he was like 6 weeks premature, and he was way skinny, and you could see like the lines of his skull, and his eyes were bugging out, and he was not pleasant to look at. But we loved him, and he was dear to us, but we were also conscious of the fact that he looked like that. Well, one time we were at church, and a little kid comes up, and he goes to my wife, and he's like, "He looks like an alien." Oof. And you should have seen the look on his mother's face. She was mortified. And my wife is so gracious about these kinds of things because we both know what little kids are like, and we thought he did look like an alien. And she bent down and she's like, "You're right, sweetheart. He does look like an alien."
You see, that's the biggest difference between your family and mine. Because I swear to you, Ben, if that little kid had done that to me and my wife, I'd have bent down, gotten in his face, and be like, "That's because he is an alien. We don't know where our kid is, but we got this one."
I can totally see you actually saying that.
Oh yeah, because that's the other thing that's great about little kids is because they don't have all of this, the higher level functions, is you can just lie to them all day and they'll buy it, and it's great.
So that mother was trying to figure out the same thing you were, like what rule do I give my child later to make sure this doesn't happen again? But we were also giving her, we're basically saying to the mother, in effect, we know that children just let whatever they're thinking come out of their mouth, and it's okay. We're not offended, and everything's fine.
Well, and here's the question: how old was that kid?
I don't know.
You see, because 3, and that's fine. But there's that window now where, as he gets older, it becomes less and less acceptable.
You're right. If it had been a 7-year-old, there would have been a totally different talk.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been a talk. It would have been a dirty look at the mother. And then if it's like a 12-year-old, then it would have been a dirty look and maybe a talking to the kid right then. It's like, "Oh, that's an ugly baby." "Oh, well, thanks. You're ugly too. Now piss off."
Yeah.
Ooh, can I say that on the podcast? You have to bleep that out.
So another story I want to tell that I think is a good illustration of this that fits in my parenting style is when we got to England, I took my two youngest daughters on a walk. I think they were like 4 and 6 at the time. And as we were walking through the park, I recognized something from my childhood. It was stinging nettle. I don't know if you have any experience with stinging nettle. It's not like poison ivy or something that later gives you a rash. It's more like bumblebee weed, where if you touch it, it immediately ejects toxins into your skin and you feel it.
Well, I live in Arizona. I have no idea what it's like to be surrounded by pokey plants.
Yes, it's like touching a cactus, except you don't look at it and see danger. It doesn't look like a dangerous plant.
Oh, okay. That is different. That does, like, every plant in Arizona wants to be dead, and I know it by looking at it.
I got it. Anyone can look at a cactus and realize there's danger there. This is the opposite. This is a plant that the leaves almost look like they're smooth to the touch. Okay. But if you touch it, it's like touching a jellyfish. You know, it injects poison into your skin.
That doesn't sound like a nice plant at all.
No, it's called stinging nettle. So I recognized it from my childhood, and I was surprised that I recognized it because I hadn't seen it in 3 decades. But I looked at it, and I turned to my daughters, who were kind of following in my tracks, and I said, "Girls, that stinging nettle, don't touch it. It will hurt you." And as an illustration of the differences in their two personalities, my 6-year-old daughter pulled her arms in close to her chest and walked past it, almost with her posture like leaning away from it. My second daughter, as she walked past it, she reached out her hand and brushed across it.
You see, and that's 2 different developmental stages of children, where the 6-year-old sees you as still the authority of all knowledge in the universe, where the other one is just now starting to question, you know what, I don't think Daddy knows as much as he lets on.
They're 11 and 9 now, and it's still the same. Like, if we did it today, it would be the same outcome. It's also their personalities. Anyway, it stung her, immediately.
No kidding.
Yeah, big welts and wincing pain, but she's also proud enough that she didn't cry about it. She was like...
Did you please tell me you rubbed it in her face for the next, week?
I still retell this story, and she knows I'm talking about her.
You tell, a daughter who will remain nameless as you stare right at her.
All right, so I want to change the subject a bit. I want to hear about the photos that you posted on social media of a birthday party that was like the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. Oh, geez.
Do we have time to launch into this? How long do you want the episode to be?
All right, we can save that one for next time. How about that's a teaser for next time?
Okay, so yes, I'll put in a little bit to that. I come from a family that is, at least since I was a kid, we are known for having elaborate birthday parties to the point of nonsensical and somewhat dangerous, probably, if they were unsupervised. So I just experienced yet another dangerous and nonsensical birthday party for my nephew last week. And it was probably the end-all, be-all of irresponsible parenting on my brother's side.
That was a really good teaser for our next podcast.
Right. So we'll just leave it there. Nobody got hurt, and it was all in good fun. But good Lord, it could have gone south quick.
All right. So there's a couple things we want to talk about next time. There is one thing I do want to say before we finish up, though, and that is that I want to read a book together. I know we talked about this before. I don't know if you have an idea for me, but the agreement was that we're going to swap. So right. I already have my title picked out. I'm going to mention it now, and then if you got one for me, you can do the same.
I do.
I figure the format we can do. Great. So I figure the format we could do is we just decide who's first, read it, within an agreed amount of time that's reasonable, and kind of take some notes so that we can kind of talk about it in detail later on. So mine is a book called Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means So Much. It's a book by economist Sendil Mullinthan and Elder Shafir, and in it they basically examine all the different ways in your life in which you might experience scarcity, which causes a psychological condition that gives it a great degree of similarity so that people behave the same way no matter what context they're in. Meaning if you're poor, as in scarce of money, or if you're hungry, as in scarce of food, or as if you're lonely, as in scarce of human relationships, the kinds of behaviors and things that you'll do are the same no matter what. It's really interesting.
That does sound interesting. And I have read other books like that. Like, I do tend to enjoy books written by economists, if for no other reason than economics makes sense to me as a way to track and explain human behavior in the large term. So, I mean, that sounds like something I'd be interested in reading anyway. So thank you for the recommendation.
Okay. So that's my pick. What do you got?
So my pick is, I know you don't like fiction, So there's one that I picked out because it's a shorter fiction, and it's from an author that I know that you've at least read before or appreciate. And so I'm going to name this. It's called Mistborn. It's either Mistborn or The Final Empire, depending on when the book was printed. It's by Brandon Sanderson. It is fiction, and it's a good fiction for you, I think, because it's shorter. It probably takes about 10 hours if you listen to it on an audiobook. And it does a good job of breaking some of the tropes that you have in other normal fiction. And so I'm just interested to see your take on it. And then there's specific questions and things that I want to discuss with you about that storyline and about how he created the characters and how he chose to tell the story. And yeah, that'll be a good discussion, I think. So now the question becomes what is our timeline for reading these books?
So 10-hour book is something I could easily consume, in 2 weeks and be ready to discuss before the next time we record a podcast. But if we want to skip 2 ahead, that might be better, especially if we have friends that are listening along and also want a chance to read the book before we go into our discussion about them.
Well, I think while we're going to need to make some accommodation for the silent listener, I think we can't just hold things up. Like you read 2 books or not, or maybe you've already read them. I don't know. They can wait. The podcast can sit and wait until they read it. Like we only have
discussed them both in the same episode. So let's pick which one we're gonna do next time, and then we'll do the other one the time after that.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Since the nonfiction sounds like it's going to be a little longer and harder to digest, why don't you read my book first, and then I can.
Wait! I got it. How poetic would it be if we do rock, paper, scissors?
Oh, that would be poetic. Now, how do we just have to go in the honor system that we do rock, paper, scissors, and then we're going to say what we're going to say at the same time, or we're going to say what we threw?
No, we're just gonna throw it, and then afterwards we'll say what we threw, and then yeah.
we will agree not to cheat, and then we won't change our answer after the other person says it.
Yes.
Okay. And now,
okay.
To reillustrate, it's rock, paper, scissors, and then you throw it.
Okay. Rock, paper, scissors.
All right. What'd you throw?
I threw paper.
I threw scissors.
Okay. So you won. So does that mean we do your book next time?
I think we do my book first, and then we'll do yours after that.
Okay.